This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenawalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Hi, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Why, Maura, it's time for spring training.
It is? Yeah.
And what do you think the chances are that the Pirates or the Phillies are going to maybe go to the World Series this year?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think the Phillies stand a better chance than the Pirates. They've been struggling the last couple of years, so we'll cross our fingers. They've had a couple of good years, so.
Well, and all Phillies fans, hope springs eternal. But,
yes. And Pirates.
Yes. We have to have lots of patience, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, today, speaking of patience, we are coming upon a new motoring season.
Yes, we are.
And in a new motoring season, frequently, Pennsylvania motorists sometimes will say it takes a little bit of patience on some of the main routes.
That's a good thing.
Because of all the construction. And who better to talk about highway construction and the state of highways in Pennsylvania than our good friend Bob Latham, who is the Executive Vice President of Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. Bob, welcome back to the show.
Charlie, Maura, great to be with you. As we always say, the old joke is we have two seasons in Pennsylvania. Winter and highway construction is the other season, and the state flower is the cone or the highway barrel.
You love that. You love that.
Exactly. That's my goal.
Yeah.
But only because we have more miles of highway in Pennsylvania, state highway, than all of New England and New York combined. And we have a freeze-thaw situation which plays havoc with our pavements. So we have older pavements as well. We're an older state, so we continuously have to spend money to upgrade our pavements, our roads, and but particularly our bridges.
But there's more money to spend this year, correct?
We've done very well the last several years in addressing a problem that's been going on for a long, long time, and that is where we were shifting money from the highway fund over to the general fund to pay for the operations of the state police. State police, very, very important that they be funded, but we were sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul and spending as much as $800 million a year in highway construction money, we think, for the operation of the state police. And that's been ratcheted down over the last several years. There seems to be an agreement to get that down to zero in the next two budget cycles.
Oh, that's
very
great news.
Very happy about that, and that'll mean that just over that last period of time, it'll be $500 million a year more in money for road maintenance and road construction and reconstruction, and it's very crucial because we do have an issue with our bridges we'll talk about a little bit later here.
Bob, that has always been one of the major problems, and you've talked about it to Maura and me and to our viewers in the past, that those funds being diverted to pay for the state police, and so now that has been resolved and the state police have their own revenue stream.
Yeah, we always talked about the fact that we have one of the highest gas taxes in the country, but the problem was then we were taking a good portion of that money and putting it over into the general fund and not using it for its intended purposes. And if you did those calculations, the money that was being raised to go to roads wasn't as much as other states.
So you're saying our gas tax is going to be lowered?
No.
Okay. I had to ask.
Well, I will say it actually. I said no, but actually yes, because we had a blip last year where we exceeded the floor in the calculation of the gas tax, and actually went up for 1 year, and then it did come back down because prices receded a little bit.
Well, one of the other funding issues has always been with the state transportation system is that the Turnpike has had to fund a lot of the operations of PennDOT, and everyone knows that that's unsustainable in Harrisburg, but yet nothing has been done about that. Are there plans? Is something afoot that's going to finally resolve that, Bob?
Well, when we passed Act 89 back in 2013, part of the deal there was that the spin-off of turnpike tolls would be used to sell bonds that would then kind of pass through PennDOT to public transit agencies all throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That was a 10-year plan. That plan actually did sunset last year. So for the first time in 10 years, the tolls at the turnpike will not be going to pay off bonds that then goes to transit agencies. And as a result, we're now seeing that the Southeast Pennsylvania Transit Association Administration, SEPTA, and others have come in for a request for more money. Actually, they're looking for about $1.5 billion over the next 5 years, and the governor Ciarrocchi has proposed that. It remains to be seen whether that'll get through the General Assembly in the budget process or not.
I have a question about my favorite topic,
Yes.
which is the automated speed zones.
Yeah.
What's the latest?
Good. How many
on
times have you been pinched?
Just one warning, and it was 2 years ago.
Okay. I keep trying to get you to slow down.
I do. I'm slowing down.
We were thrilled at the end of the session in December that program was reauthorized. It's very, very important. We've seen it's working. It is getting people to slow down in highway work zones, and as a result, we're going to be expanding. The PennDOT is going to be expanding the use of those cameras in other areas. But in addition to that, and you'll be happy to know, Maura, that we're going to be doing more and better signage to alert motorists as they come into those zones.
That is really good news.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. We've been a little bit deficient in our signage and in our warnings. And of course, every location you can find on the internet. You can go to PennDOT's website and find out exactly where they are. So there's one way to find out. The other is the signage, and the best way to avoid fines is not to speed speed through a highway work zone. But no, we're happy. We think that will result in less crashes, and it'll be it's even more important to motorists. We look at it from the safety of our workers' standpoint, very important, but it's also most of the injuries and fatalities are actually motorists themselves, so it'll be good for drivers.
Oh, that's great.
Well, Bob, can you tell us anything about, in the past you have talked about this, I wondered if there's any new information about how the automated speed enforcement system is progressing or doing in other states. What's going on in other states?
We've seen Indiana was the most recent state to pass enact automated speed enforcement. I think Kentucky and several others are looking at it as well. Maryland's Governor Wes Moore convened a commission to look at how they can, in addition to automated speed enforcement which they've had in Maryland for a number of years, do some other changes. Of course, there was a horrific crash on the Baltimore Beltway last year. It killed 6 people in a highway work zone. That was really due to just an unbelievably excessive speed through people racing along the Beltway. So it's a very important topic and one that's being looked at the highest levels in many states.
Yeah, that certainly wasn't an anomaly, but it was still tragic. So
yes.
Tragic. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit. I have a question for you about electric vehicles.
Yes.
Do electric vehicles include hybrids? Because I have friends who are moving to hybrids. They're not putting gas in their cars.
There are hybrid vehicles. Obviously, you have both gasoline and
electric. Yeah.
And then there is the entire electric vehicle.
Okay.
There are both of those on the road.
And they would both be impacting the amount of revenue being brought in under the gas taxes.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Of course, an entirely electric powered vehicle is paying zero,
right.
And the hybrids are paying whatever amount that they're buying. So, the proposal right now, there was a Senate bill that passed and is in the House Transportation Committee, would be to assess a commensurate registration fee for electric vehicles as to what somebody who's driving a gas-powered car pays in gas taxes, about $290 a year. that the average motorist, I guess, would pay in gas taxes. So that's in the House Transportation Committee now. We'll see where that goes.
Does it have a lot of support?
I think so. The thing about it is electric vehicle sales shot up, and now they're kind of leveling off. And it's not a lot of money. It's really more of an equity thing. Mm-hmm. We're only talking about $20 million a year in revenue there, which sounds ridiculous to sit there and go, well, that $20 million, that's just a drop in the bucket. Well, I guess it is in the grand scheme of things when you have PennDOT with about a $5 billion a year budget. Now, some of that's passed through, but our construction program, for example, is just under $3 billion. So that's not even maintenance and snow plowing and all that. So it's very expensive to maintain all that infrastructure. Yeah. But the EV bill, I think, will be looked at this spring, and we'll see where that goes.
Great.
Well, we only have about a minute and a half left, Bob. Wanted to ask you if you could focus a little bit on our bridges. Where are we in Pennsylvania? How many bridges need to be fixed? How many are deficient? How much money do we have? What are we going to be able to do in the upcoming season?
That's a good point. 10 years ago, we passed the funding bill, Act 89. We were able to fix a lot of our bridges. We have 25,000 bridges just on PennDOT system alone. We're seeing now that while we fixed a lot of them, they're still old. So 2/3 of our bridges are over 50 years old. Many of them have structural problems. We're going to have to get at that here in the near future. It's going to take more revenue than we have now and so we're looking at ways that we can establish funding specifically for the bridges, so it will allow us to maintain roads that we have, the pavements and so forth that we have. And I don't know that we're at a solution yet on funding. There are many things being kicked around, none of which are popular. Carving out some of the sales tax and using that to offset borrowing or bonding, as they say. Looking at the distribution fee. So when you have a package delivered to your house, there would be a fee attached to help maintain roads and bridges. Since obviously we've got a lot of trucks running around roads now. There would be a local component of that too, because local governments have even more roads and bridges than PennDOT as well. So we're going to start to flesh that out a little bit. I'll look forward to coming back and talking a little bit more detail about that potential program here in the future.
What do you think? How much of it do you think we can finish in the next? In about 15 seconds we have left here. Can you give us how much of it can we realistically get done?
Well, I think we could probably get the electric vehicle fee bill done this year, continue the step down of the state police, then look at long-term funding maybe later on in 2025 or beyond.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
You bet.
Bob, we appreciate you coming in and give us an update, and we'll be right back with the second segment of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. On this segment of Behind the Headlines, I'm joined by Guy Ciarrocchi. Guy, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Charles.
Oh, you're welcome. Guy, you are the senior fellow for the Commonwealth Foundation, You're a columnist for Broad and Liberty and for Real Clear PA. You are the former chief of staff for the Lieutenant Governor Cawley, and you were at earlier. You were the Deputy Attorney General of Pennsylvania. You have a long list of accomplishments and a long history of in politics in Pennsylvania. So we're so honored and so just so grateful that you would come and join us today.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we wanted to talk about something that has been in the news for many years now. It's not going to go away. Perhaps it's subsided a little bit at this point, but it's the whole issue of monuments and statues and what role do they play in our history. And you wrote a very wonderful piece, I thought, about the whole controversy involving William Penn at Welcome Park in Philadelphia. Could you tell our viewers what happened, what ignited that particular situation?
Sure. So we're all familiar with the national stories about Washington and Jefferson, but here in our own backyard in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, there was suddenly this push to remove William Penn's statue from a park dedicated to the founding of Pennsylvania and William Penn. And to me, it seemed, not only offended me historically, but just violated common sense. I mean, why would you remove William Penn's statue from a park to welcome people to Pennsylvania, a state named after William Penn? And under the silly, if you will, I don't know how else to say it, I wish I had a more collegiate word, but under the silly idea that William Penn was offensive, a man who established a commonwealth to create a haven for religious liberty and tolerance. If you're offended by William Penn, you're probably offended by a lot of other things that you shouldn't be offended about.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, that park, Welcome Park in Philadelphia, that is comprised of the area in the yard where William Penn's home was built in Philadelphia when he first arrived in, 1682. So that was so surprising. The statue of him is a replica of the statue that's on the top of City Hall.
Yes, correct. Again, it's the whole idea of celebrating our history and celebrating our founding with someone who, while all of us are flawed, but as a founder is really regarded as not only someone who established a good city, but established it in a way that invited tolerance and collegiality and really laid the bedrock for the city of brotherly love. And to me, it is, sort of woke politics gone amok when you get to the point of saying that even William Penn should not have a statue, so that people visiting Philadelphia, the people visiting Pennsylvania, should somehow forget or try to cast aside the very person that created this place, that ultimately becomes the cradle of liberty, becomes the nation's first capital. To try and hide him from history is a grave mistake.
And the interesting thing is there were many of the Native American tribes who did not ask for this to occur and actually support the preservation of the Penn statue right where it is.
Sure, and again, it's something that, if you walk into a Sheetz and talk to the people standing in line, no one's clamoring to get rid of William Penn. I mean, he's just not someone that people are bothered by. I think we're living in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so that this was not really at the assistance of historians. It was not at the persistence of Native Americans. It is really woke culture run to its extreme, where a group of bureaucrats who live in an echo chamber that suddenly have decided that this nation's founding is something we should apologize about. And that Jefferson and Washington go aside. And if you continue down that path of destruction, you eventually get to William Penn. And then you realize that for many people, they would just as soon forget the whole founding of this nation and all of the people who helped get us where we are.
And the people who had this idea actually were individuals with the National Park Service, isn't that correct?
Yes. And when eventually folks like you and me and folks watching at home, and again, people standing at Sheetz or in Wawa, where I come from, when enough people rose up and said, this is just really flat out goofy, the politicians, the senior level politicians, came out of the woodwork and said, "No, this was a mistake. It was just a draft, and this should not have happened." And I'm glad they fixed it, but it should never have got to it. And I think for the viewers, we should understand that this is where the natural progression of sort of woke politics, this idea that America is inherently flawed and that we should apologize or forget our founders. No one ever said our founders were perfect, but to not recognize the important contribution they made to Philadelphia, to Pennsylvania, and the United States is just flat out silly, not only violating any idea of understanding history, but it's just silly. And thank goodness everyday Americans stood up and said, this is too far.
Yeah, the National Park Service responded by saying this was a preliminary idea and it was prematurely released, and that was all a mistake, and they backtracked on this. But if there are a good number of politicians, such as Brian Cutler from Lancaster County, had not stood up, and others, would it have occurred? Would the National Park Service have gone ahead with it?
Sure, right. The political equivalent of oops, asking for a mulligan. Look, as you know from your experience in government, is that when something goes wrong, it's always the staff's fault. The staff went rogue. When anything wonderful happened, it's because of the wonderful leadership. So the wonderful leadership stepped forward and said the staff had gone rogue. And again, my objective in writing my column was not to attack any one person or institution, but say that as a culture, we are letting this politics of wokeism get out of control. We should be able to have a debate. No one has ever suggested that William Penn or Thomas Jefferson were perfect. But to not recognize the overwhelming positive contribution is ridiculous. And to suggest that somehow their statues should go away. Again, we read about how at the University of Virginia, there was a push to remove Thomas Jefferson's statue. At the very university he founded. That comes forward 2 years later to William Penn's statue should be removed from the Welcome Center in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in the city of brotherly love. And again, when we say this, we smile, but it comes from a mindset that says that America is flawed and its history should be forgotten or ignored. And that's just fundamentally wrong. It doesn't pass the straight face test. But we have to speak out and we have to push back because we have to say this is too far. Our history is something to be proud of, and more importantly, it's something to pass on to our children, not to hide away.
The interesting thing is the Philadelphia Inquirer at that point, when this first emerged, was willing to issue an editorial that said, well, we don't really visit that park very often. We can see William Penn on top of City Hall. The state is named for him. That's enough. Should just move on. Do you remember that editorial?
Oh, I do. The irony in those things is I can even hear it in your voice, is that the idea, the silly argument that we can remove the statue because no one really sees it can be turned on its head. The statue should remain in place because it really doesn't offend anyone because most people don't see it. Again, the idea of removing Thomas Jefferson from the University of Virginia gets us to William Penn should be removed from Welcome Park. Gets us to eventually we should remove William Penn from the top of City Hall, which eventually gets us to we should change the name of the Commonwealth. Because if you start down this path where we stand in judgment 300 or 400 years later and look down our noses at these folks and reveal all their flaws, and that somehow is a justification to pretend they didn't exist or to recognize they're good, we get to stuff that's just flat out goofy. But it's not just goofy, it undermines us understanding all the good, all that was right, all that is special. William Penn founded a commonwealth built on religious tolerance, on inclusion. One of the really bedrock principles that invited the United States of America, out of many, one. Religious tolerance breeds the mindset that leads to the Declaration of Independence. To forget about William Penn is to somehow suggest you should forget about the founding of America. And most Americans are not going to sit back and let that happen.
and he cooperated with the Native Americans in a way that no other leader of any colony did, and the Native Americans, even to this day, remember him for that and appreciate the approach that he took on dealing with them and interacting with them. So that's why it's this whole incident was just so surprising. But then there are other statues in Philadelphia that have attracted some attention. Christopher Columbus. We find former Mayor Frank Rizzo. And then there was also, by golly, there was also Kate Smith out at the Spectrum. Is this something that Philadelphia has become focused on? Are they focused on statues now?
Well, again, much like with William Penn, I think most of us living our lives are living our lives. We're going about our day-to-day business. It's sort of this woke culture run amok that begins to step back from 2024, 2023 social mores, social ideals of a small percentage of our populace that say if you don't fit into a certain box, we should pretend you didn't exist. And the idea that we should only honor perfect people. If we're going to start having statues only for perfect people, there'll be no statues. There should be no statues in Rome or Greece or Egypt. The idea that you don't get a statue unless you're perfect is silly. And the idea that we need some woke police to go around and remove these statues is ridiculous. They're part of our history and part of our culture, and they're an integral part of it. And to remove them is to suggest that our nation is flawed and we should be embarrassed. This is a good but imperfect nation. We should celebrate our history.
If we were only going to build statues for perfect people, there was only one perfect man who ever lived, at least in my estimation, and probably yours as well. So, yes, and we find this also. You mentioned Jefferson. Just as a parting mention, the city of Charlottesville has emasculated its history recently. If you're planning a trip to Charlottesville in the spring to see the beautiful dogwoods, you may want to reconsider it, because almost all of the history has been removed from Charlottesville. They've removed the statue of Lewis and Clark. They've removed the statue of George Rogers Clark. They've removed the statue of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. And it wasn't done in a very collegial or fashion. And it's still producing lots of debate. But the city of Charlottesville is sort of the worse for wear. They have been diminished, and there's far less to see there and to honor. But that's for another program, perhaps. And maybe, Guy, you would come back and continue to talk about this. Certainly, there's lots of other folks in Philadelphia to honor. Mario Alonzo has a mural, but perhaps he should have a statue. And on that, we're out of time. We'll see you next time on Behind the Headlines. Thank you, Guy, for coming.
Thanks for having me.